Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I'm your host, Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for over 35 years and been taking pictures for over 40. And we're bringing you these Creator Hour conversations with incredible photographers, great backstories to their defining images. And with us today, we have Nikon Ambassador Stacy Pearsall. How are you doing, Stacy, this morning?
Howdy, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing great, and it's so good to have you with us, and we're so thankful that you're giving us some of your time. I know you're very busy, even though we're in this wake of a pandemic, and it's so good to have you here. And I know you have such a great story to tell. I mean, you got such a background, military photographer of the year twice. You work with all kinds of organizations, America's Vet Dogs. You have your own personal project that you're running called the Veterans Portrait Project. We want to talk about all that, and I know you have some images to back all that up. But to get started, really, let's bring it home. It's no secret that you are married to Andy Dunaway, who works for Nikon. I got a man crush on Andy, and certainly one of my friends as well as colleagues in this business. Great photographer in his own rights. But how are you and Andy doing? How's the family? What's going on where you are?
Well, Andy's really good, and I think that 2020, while it's been very challenging for so many out there, and for anybody who's been extremely impacted by the COVID situation, really sorry. But for us, we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons, and I think that if anything that the lockdown has done for us, it's allowed us to spend more time with each other, because 2019 was absolutely bananas with all the traveling we were doing. And we were like passing ships between Andy's Nikon trips and my Veterans Portrait Project trips. Well, we barely got to see each other. So with the lockdown, it's allowed us to spend more time with each other. And what was crazy was we actually moved into our new house out in the country right before the lockdown. So I can go right out in my front yard and visit my horses and play with my dogs. I've got a greenhouse that I built and a garden I'm working on. And I usually kill plants, but I've managed to keep some alive, which is good. And I think the other benefit about technology is it still allows me to stay connected with folks like you. And so we've been making do and just adapting to life. And I think that's what it is all about. And really the story of my life. That should be my mantra: adapt and overcome.
Well, it's so beautiful, especially to see you in your home setting. And like you said, that technology is great. Doesn't necessarily always work out great with the family at the holiday events when we're all trying to, have dinner in different places and Zoom chat. But certainly to be able to meet, to talk to you and other ambassadors. We've had meetings over Zoom just randomly, nothing to do about business, just to talk about life in general and some of the things going on. So it has been great to have that kind of technology with us. And so to have you here today, again, blessing to us. We're very thankful for you to give us your time and share the backstories on images. And as I apologize to every photographer for asking them to take, somewhat of decades of work and combine it down or cull it down to, 8 to 10 images. It's not a fair thing to ask. And a lot of people have told me that it was great therapy for them because it was a very challenging task. But I always want to know, and I don't know that I know this about you as long as I've known you, is when was the first time you picked up a camera? And at what point does it transition into, I am Stacy Pearsall, military photographer, or Stacy Pearsall, professional photographer, portrait photographer? Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you got here right now today.
Well, just for absolutely true transparency, 100% honesty, I still feel like an imposter. So I see all these other pros and I feel like I'm not on that level. But I think that's a very artistic frame of mind. Anyway, I digress. But I will also say that photography and I were not an instant love affair. And I usually considered myself actually more of an other medium artist, like painting and drawing and sculpture. And I think my biggest hiccup was I was not figuring out the technicality of photography and being able to translate what I saw creatively in my mind's eye or what I was seeing in front of me and being able to capture that with a camera. So I started in film. And the first time I actually held a camera was in high school. I was taking a black and white wet lab class. And I remember thinking of all the art classes that I'd taken, it was my least favorite. Granted, I love any art, so if I were to pit it against English and math, it was still really the bomb. But anyway, when I joined the service, I was talking to my uncle who was working assignments for young airmen coming into the service. And I called him up and I said, is there anything to do with the arts in the military? And he came back after doing some research and said I could be a photographer, a graphics designer, or a videographer. And I began to study what those were. And I was thinking graphics design would be a lot of fun because I have such fun doing drawing and conceptualizing, things like that. But unfortunately, I found out that it was really computer based. And then I was right back to that technical thing. And I'm like, videography was really sort of out right away. And I'm sad looking back that I dismissed it so much because it is very creative. But I was 17 and stupid and young and unknowing. Anyway, so at 17, I asked for a guaranteed job with the Air Force. I had to wait because it was in such high demand. If you imagine, like, at a military base, every base across the country, there's probably maybe at least one photographer, tops maybe 4 at each base. Whereas you may have 100 or 200 or 300 cops and maintainers and other jobs. So very, very, very small, and everybody wanted it. But I wanted to wait, and so I did. And what was great is I finally got the camera in my hands, and I was finally figuring out the technical part of it. I really did not have an aha moment until I joined Combat Camera, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, well, but that's so important, and I want to mention too, because I do know this, and I know your career in the military brought you to a lot of dangerous places. As a journalist and documentary photographer, you were in the midst of all of the chaos and war and conflict. It has affected your health, and we'll talk a little bit about that throughout, if you don't mind. And just, I want to hear this entire story as we talk about all of these pictures that you're going to show us, and certainly all of the cool things that you're doing now with the Veterans Portrait Project. And I know you got some samples there, but you've been through a lot. I mean, not many people I talk to have been awarded the Purple Heart or the Bronze Star Medal and been in that kind of danger. And so I'm so thankful, one, that you're here with us today, but that you have this great story to tell and that you're willing to share it with us. So thank you for that. I know we talked about this personally. You know, your travel has been limited. So like everybody else, you're home, you're resetting. You mentioned that it's a great time now for you to spend time with Andy when you're crossing paths normally. Is there any point in time where you've just said, God, I wish I was going on the road? Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
Said,
don't hold
God,
back.
I wish he was going on the road. You know, Andy and I, we actually worked together for, I would say, like a hot minute after he retired from the Air Force. And we just think so differently, from management style to creative photography approaches and how we plan photo shoots. And I appreciate my marriage more than I do having my husband as a coworker. I think it works for some people, but we are just much happier having a recap of the day instead of living the day.
Well, I'm sure you talk about your horses and getting kicked in the head. He talks about his fancy sport cars. But you and I, we kind of share a bit of a parallel, because a big part of my career was calling on the branches of the military and teaching electronic imaging and going on aircraft carriers. And I met you through the military and Combat Camera, and our good friend Mike Haggerty, who passed away years ago. And so many great memories, some sad memories, but we've had a long a journey together. So I would love it if it's okay with you. Let's start pulling up the pictures. I'm going to share the screen, and we'll start a show. And I'm going to kind of let you take it away from here. I mean, these are pictures that you've selected, your defining images, and please give us the backstory on the images to come, as well as this one.
Well, okay. So the reason I picked this picture, and let me back up for just a second. I need to be sure that y'all know that I was not a great photographer when I got accepted into Combat Camera. I would say I was passable at best. And here's why. My first 4 years I spent doing intelligence, which is kind of an oxymoron for the military. Anyway, I was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base at the Strategic Command, and I worked with satellite imagery, and we were making like bomb targets and doing bomb damage assessment, that kind of stuff. And then I got stationed in England for another 2 years doing the same thing with the U-2 program. If you don't know the U-2, that is not the band, it's the plane that flies on the atmosphere and takes pictures with like a 5.5-inch roll film. Everything that I was doing photographically, that is with a camera in the hand, was done on my own time, really. So I was kind of taking everything I learned from the Defense Information School and expounding upon that. But really the only tutelage I had was whatever I could find through books or through what the Air Force had taught me, which very, very limited. Anyway, I knew a position was coming open for combat camera, and I really, really wanted to go there because it was like the tip of the spear for photography and the end all be all. But when I put my portfolio together, it was really not awesome. I was really lacking in technical development, and it showed in my work. But what was benefit for me is that the guy who was the superintendent for the still flight at First Combat Camera Squadron was my former superintendent when I was at Offutt Air Force Base. And like any self-respecting person who is looking for a job they really, really want, I groveled a lot. And I called him up and I said, hey, you know my work ethic. I will literally never sleep, and I will bleed and work myself to the bone, and I will learn. And I did. Not right away. I reported to combat camera in January of 2002. So 9/11 had just taken place, and the majority of the units, or my unit, were out supporting Operation Enduring Freedom. I began my training right away under a former Navy photographer by the name of Clarence Brown, whom I think you know, right, Mike? And so he started talking to me about the concepts of ISO and f-stop and shutter speed, but what was more than that was talking about photojournalism and how to capture moments and see scenes and using layering in your photography, and overwhelming. In addition to all of that, I was learning how to do combat operations because we were working alongside other branches of service and other countries' branches of service. So I had to learn to be a little bit more autonomous, to know my fundamentals, and to be able to do that when nobody else could hold my hand. And this picture was from one of the very first training deployments that I had to Santiago, Chile, with one of your former creators, our guest, Lisa Zunzan-Mika, who we like to call Sergeant Z at the time.
Lisa,
and,
yes.
Yeah. And I want to give her a huge shout out because there weren't a lot of women going on early on in combat camera, and she really embraced me and put me under her wing and showed me a lot of things that I didn't know, but also empowered me with the things I did. And that was the motivation I really needed. And because of her and other mentors that I had at combat camera, I could capture pictures like this. And I was working on a UN training operation down in Chile, and they were doing these scenarios with interrogations and how to properly work with, how do you properly work with a warlord? Anyway, so the scenario is that there's a drug warlord they're trying to talk to and to deal with, like prisoner exchange or something like that. Anyway, my Spanish really sucked, so I couldn't really understand what they were saying. But the body language was great, the lighting was great, and I was shooting with what do you think about this? A D1 at the time? Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yep. Remember it well. This interesting though that you bring it. This is an exercise, right?
It is.
So emotionally, you kind of go in there knowing in your mind it's an exercise, but then you're taken into the real world, and we'll talk about more pictures that you've taken through your career. But what's that like? I mean, again, you're here in a practice session, but then you're out in the real world doing that. How do you handle that emotionally?
I remember before I'd even gone to war, I was talking to several other former combat photographers who come in to mentor young combat photographers like myself at the time. And many of them had been to Korea and had been to Vietnam. And I think there was even a couple of World War II combat photographers. And I remember asking, how do you know when you have to put your camera down and engage in the fight? Because we were combatants. We, unlike civilian journalists who don't engage, they just photograph the situation, we were considered an asset, a combatant asset. And I remember them saying, it's the pucker factor, and that's different for everybody. So when you feel like things are dire enough, that's when you have to make that choice to put your creator's hat off and put your combat helmet on.
That's so amazing. And so where most photographers have the freedom of walking around with their camera, seeing things and shooting pictures, not only do you have to figure out survival skills, you're wearing the uniforms, you got all this gear on you, you're in the situations, you've got your camera as your documentary tool, but then there are times you got to put that down and then engage. I just wanted to recap that because that's so important for people to understand that it's just not going out there and standing by and shooting pictures, nor are other conflict photographers or journalists like Lindsay Adario and others. I mean, they're putting themselves in some really, really dangerous situations because their passion's to tell the story. So you've got a little bit of all that going on, as well as defending the country and defending the people that you're with. So that's pretty amazing. But I think this is a great picture. I mean, you know, yes, your technical skills will grow, you know, but the moment, the cigarette, the gun, certainly impactful, whether it's a training exercise or not. So let's move on. And what do we have going on here? Where are you? What are you doing? Why'd you take this picture and why'd you put it in this collection?
Okay. So what I want to say this is I was acting more like a machine gunner where I was spraying and praying something would turn out as I was developing my technical skills.
So just for the Creators Hour audience, what spray and pray means is when you hammer down on the shutter release, you use your fastest frame rate that you can possibly have, and you just shoot and don't stop and hope that there's something in the mix of 60 images you just shot that's going to work. That's what spray and pray is.
Right. So of 1,000 frames, you'd be lucky to get one solid. And that was just kind of lucky because you sprayed in the right direction. I wouldn't say I was that bad, but that's the kind of concept the auspice I was operating under. And I think I was still very much struggling with ISO and f-stop and shutter speed. I'm not going to lie. It was really tough for me to figure this out. I don't know why, because for some people it's a total breeze. The creative part, like the composition and the light and seeing it wasn't my problem. It was like translating that to the technical stuff. But then the reason I shared the last one was my ISO was stupid high and my shutter speed was like 1/15 of a second. And there was a lot of things I could have done technically different. I was lucky that it came out successfully because the composition was great, but it could have been better. And then fast forward, I knew that I wanted to become an aerial combat photographer. Well, the goal was to be an aerial combat photojournalist, which meant I had to go to Syracuse University, but those were pipe dreams that needed to go like way down the road.
So Syracuse University, the Newhouse School.
The military.
There was a military training program going on there, right? Does it still happen right now? Is that still going on?
Yes. Yeah, I think they're having to modify because of COVID, but it is still going on. And our den mother, Nancy Austin, who, for anybody who's been through the MPJ program, knows Miss Nancy Austin. It's amazing. Anyway. Yeah,
I've actually done a bunch of speaking engagements at Syracuse, and how could I not throw out Tony Golden? Hopefully he's tuning in, who ran the photo program at Syracuse.
And David Sutherland, who's now retired, but he literally changed my approach to photography, and I can talk about that in a minute.
Gotcha. All right. So you suck at the fundamentals. You suck at, everything except composing. But you know what? You're no different than the rest of us because we all started off somewhere. So to give you a little, and you're very humble because you don't win Photographer of the Year in the military twice as a woman without having some great skills. So you do eventually grow the skills, right? But I'm looking at this and you're right. The artistic side is definitely there. The composition, the silhouette, the sunset or rise, whatever's happening here. But continue on.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you win military photographer of the year, man or woman, without blood, sweat, and tears. It takes a lot of sweat equity. Yeah. But I think, so this picture was one of my first aerial photography operation missions. And I was still in training, getting certified. And I remember, and I'm going to share this anecdote because I think it's important. I had only been in the unit for a few months. I knew I wanted to be part of the aerial program. And I was at another training operation in North Carolina doing something, learning multimedia, how to do multimedia when that was just coming to be. And we were sitting down, myself and a few of the other guys from my unit, having a beer. And I remember expressing the desire to want to be an aerial combat photographer. And one guy looked me up and down and then said, you have nice tits and ass. Of course they're going to put you in a flight suit. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond. I was quite taken aback, but I think that might have been the catalyst to prove that I could overcome the technical issues, and I can overcome a lot of things just to prove that it was my creative merit, my photographic merit, and of my work and my work ethic, and not my gender and not my looks that got me a position in the first place. And I did. I was a finalist in the military photography of the year competition within my first year of being at the unit, and got certified that year. And then I went to Iraq for the first time, all in the same year. And I think I had to prove it to myself too, because I didn't want to let those words be true. So I went to Germany and was working resupply missions, still getting certified. And they said, okay, you're going to take supplies from Germany down to Iraq, offload them in the middle of the night, and then bring them back to Germany with all the wounded from early on in the war. This is taken in June 2003. The back of the C-17 there, you can see, is that diagonal coming across. And this is one of the medical jeeps, the aeromedical evac crew, and they are loading a wounded soldier. At the time, we were doing combat entries, which is spiral landings, and then combat exits. This would minimize the likelihood of a rocket-propelled grenade or a surface-to-air type of missile from the enemy hitting our aircraft. As we were about to take off, we had offloaded all of the gear, and we had loaded all the wounded and saving the critical for last. We were getting ready to turn engines, and I, in my flight suit as an air crew, was giving directions about the emergency exits and saying, don't worry, if we crash, you're not going to need a parachute because we're going to go down quick. That was a joke. Hope you guys are laughing. I have a sick sense of humor, y'all. Sorry. Anyway, so the pilot got notice that there was a soldier who had been wounded and that we were going to wait for him. But the problem was, if we waited for him, the sun would be coming up, and that would have put the whole flight at risk. But I think this speaks to the brother and sisterhood of military members, and each and every one of them, though they had been wounded or sick, were ready and prepared to give the ultimate sacrifice for one individual. And I knew that as a photographer, I had to capture this moment for posterity and for my own reasons. And the sun was rising. I ran out on the tarmac and got as far back as I could and laid down flat on the tarmac so that I could actually put some light separation between the vehicle and the background and to see the silhouette. And I got maybe 2 frames off before they got the soldier loaded, and we took off. That was really what this image is really that pivotal moment for me where I fell in love with storytelling and through photography.
That's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, because again, you try to find those moments in life where you move forward and you grow, and that's a beautiful story. Thank you for telling us that backstory. So now you're out in the thick of it. What do we have going on here?
Okay, so everybody's like, did he get the door open? I'm just going to answer that right out the gate. No, he fell on his ass. No, didn't work. Okay, I had gone, so that image from the sunrise, along with a number of other images that I took later that year with ground force operations in Iraq, I earned Military Photographer of the Year for the first time. But as I said from the very beginning, I always feel like I have imposter syndrome. I have an imposter syndrome for feeling like I'm not a pro photographer, that I'm not as talented as the amazing Nikon ambassadors are. Like, I always have to pinch myself that I'm actually part of this amazing group.
You're starting to sound like Ron McGill. Stop it. You're both super talented photographers.
But that's the thing about artists, is that most of us are extremely insecure, and
we're very critical of our work, for sure.
Yeah, and I think when we stop being critical of ourselves and we stop being humble, then we stop learning. And when you stop learning, you stop improving. And when you stop improving, you don't grow. And that is the whole part of art. And that is what leads me into the story behind this picture, because after I won Military Photographer of the Year, and I was told that I was the first military photographer to have not attended Syracuse to win.
Mm-hmm.
And that really threw people for a loop. And granted, I had only been in combat camera less than a year, or less than 2 years when I won Military Photographer of the Year. So I got accepted into Syracuse, the military photojournalism program. And I went there, and a professor by the name of Donald Sutherland, who had mentored so many other service members from all branches, told me, you've really got to stop spraying and praying something turns out. And he said, if you could just find a composition, because you see very well, if you can find a composition, hunker down and wait for 10 moments. And I'm not talking about taking just rapid fire 10 frames. I'm talking about waiting for nuanced moments.
Mm-hmm.
And, anticipating the action, get ahead of the action, let the action come to you, stop chasing it. And then you're going to have a 200% improvement on your work.
Mm-hmm.
And holy crap, mind blown. I took his advice, and it completely changed everything. So finally, all of the gears were starting to sync up together for me. And I was deployed to Iraq in 2007 during the surge to Diyala province, which was the hot spot at the time for what we now refer to as ISIS. It was ISIS beginning to really take hold in Iraq. And I was working with the first Cav and a few military transition teams who were teaching Iraqi army soldiers to take over. And this is one of those Iraqi Army Special Forces, and they were tracking down some bomb makers. And again, when Professor Sutherland said, if you can observe the action, don't have the camera to your face, just observe. And if something happens repetitively, then you're going to know that you can get out in front of it. And this is one of those situations. Now, I'm not sure that he could have ever anticipated that I would be doing it when bullets were flying, and that by getting out in front of the action, that meant I was out where the bullets are flying by myself. So I ran out in front of the force and waited, and I knew he was going to go and breach the door. I thought he was going to do it with his shoulder like so many other people did, but this guy took a flying leap, and I just happened to catch the moment right when it happened. And I think that this image is a testament to observation, anticipation, preparation, and execution.
Mm-hmm. And what you're defining there should fit for any genre in photography.
Yeah.
And those of you tuning in, live by that, because like you say, when you get to that point of photographing something that you're comfortable with, even in an environment like this, which is unpredictable, when you see things through the viewfinder happening in slow motion, that's when I know I'm locked in. Mm-hmm. That I'm actually can see the movement of a bird in flight and then the banking of the bird in flight. And I'm waiting, like you said, as Professor Sutherland had mentioned, just wait for that nuance, wait for the moment, and then start to fire and do little bursts instead of, and then I got to concentrate the entire time, but I'm not looking at the subject while the camera's firing so much. So yeah. I totally agree with that, but it's beautiful, and thank you for sharing. Did he ever open the door? I mean, how's the door get open? I got to know that. You say he got knocked on his ass. What do you do? Like a big,
No, these guys, so they couldn't get the door open. Another Iraqi soldier walked up to the wall, and another one climbed on that guy's shoulders and climbed over the fence and went in and unlocked the door.
I'm sorry.
So unromantic.
What a great finish.
Spielberg ruined it for all of us, in that we think that combat is so romantic, and it's this, artful billowing of smoke and heroism, and it's not.
No, I get it. Listen, what can't you feel here? You can't feel the sweat. You can't feel the heat, the gear, that weight of the gear, all of that. This guy's making a leap in a door, most people couldn't do, without all that gear on. So, even though he fell on his ass, I love those. They climbed over the wall. What a great bit of backstory there. So talk about this image. What do you have going on here?
I picked this image because I think it really expresses what I learned about humanity. I'm going to try and get through this one without crying, because it's hard for me not to tie emotion to it. When I was learning, everything about photojournalism was always about staying objective and always remaining somewhat on the outside and never getting emotionally involved. And I really kept a hard line before this particular set of pictures. I really kept a hard line and stayed that course, textbook photojournalism. And I remember, like, one of my amazing mentors, Mary Calvert, talked to me about emotion. If an image does not emote or evoke an image or an emotion from an individual or the viewer, or doesn't touch on somebody's heartstrings in some way, then you're not doing it right. And I think for me, what was lacking in my work prior to this 2007 Iraq deployment was, what was it going to take for me to see that emotion and to translate that? I never anticipated how life-changing that deployment was going to be for me, because I had been through combat for many years at that point. But allowing my barriers to come down also made me very vulnerable to making friends, making attachments, investing emotion, and I went in 100%. I dove right in and made a lot of really, really good friends. And sadly, because it was such a tough time, the battle for Bakuba had a lot of losses, and it was just a matter of time before I lost friends. And I wasn't the only one who was suffering. But the thing about combat is that there is a time and a place for mourning, and it wasn't during deployments. So there are things that you just don't address that build up, and that's what I'm dealing with now. But at the time, I was doing my level best to translate the emotions I was feeling through other people's experiences or like experiences. And this is an example of that. I had already lost three friends, three soldiers to a house-borne IED that had blown up. And my friend, Captain Donnie Belzer, was tragically killed by a sniper. And then my video partner had been shot and wounded and was rehabilitating in a hospital. To say I had been taken like one hit after another was the figurative sense, an understatement. And I got an assignment to go out to a patrol overwatch position and photograph the work they were doing, because ISIS was bringing bombs in through this bridge into a town called Biarritz, which was their headquarters. They had basically taken over the whole city and were assassinating anybody else who stayed behind. Well, right when I had shown up, the soldiers who were there doing the overwatch position looked really, really shaken. And I could see that emotion in them just bubbling at the surface. And I'd found out in short order that a fellow soldier from their team had been shot and killed while doing overwatch. And they couldn't leave the overwatch position because they had to finish the watch. When you spend enough time with people and you build bonds, then they begin to open up and aren't as guarded with their emotions. And the things about soldiers that I learned was that there's this unspoken behavior that you have to be macho and keep a strong facade and stay solid, and there's no time for mourning. This image is so nuanced, and the body language, and I think body language is everything, is really what speaks to their emotions in that moment. If you look, it's just like they were all talking about their friend. They were sharing a story about him, each of them, like, oh, he did this and he did that. And then suddenly there was this silence. It was so quick, silence. And then it was like everybody exhaled at the same time, and their body language just they went from having their shoulders to their ears to being like, just utter defeat with an exhale. And then everything went back to what seemed like normal. But I think between the body language and the lack of eye contact between all of them, the light that hits each of them, the background that is so telling in the space and the time in which they are in. And what was incredible was Iraq gets cold in the winter, and the only thing they had was this stovepipe that was rigged with an ammo can, and it smoked horrendously whenever it was lit. And everybody that were standing patrol was like covered in soot. And they would do this cave art. So they would like wipe the coal off their face and make handprints, which you can kind of see in the background. And if you can only imagine the soldier who was tragically killed just hours before this picture was taken, making his last mark on the wall. And for me, that's what my pictures were all about thereafter, was the human experience, that we are not infallible, we are not invincible, that we, each of us, carry the burdens from the moment we're born, and they impact us in the wake of our lives. And what do we do for ourselves and for each other in those moments? And I think this one expresses that for me.
Well, it absolutely does. And hearing you tell this story just takes it even deeper. I have to admit, I'm a bit numb right now, like hearing what you're saying. But the thing that sticks out to me the most, and on a very personal level, is very much like you, and we talk about personal projects all the time. When you let your emotion in, you start making better pictures. When I started photographing sick kids at the Ronald McDonald House, I didn't want to know their stories. I didn't want to know the afflictions. I say this all the time when I speak about it. I didn't want to know what the prognosis was because I didn't want to cry. But as our good friend Carol Guzzi has said many times, it's okay to cry. It wasn't until I started to get immersed into their worlds and understand them and know their names and know what they were sick from and know what was going on and asking a million questions about what's going to happen next. And that's when I started making portraits. That's when I started really making a connection, and it changes, and it shows that in this picture. And I think I'd love to state, for me personally, it's just when you see a picture like this, we hear about, how we applaud, military services and people protecting us and our freedoms and all of that. But this really brings it home, because this takes you into a very personal moment with these three people that, after just a loss, and then realizing now they got to pick their heads up and move on, because it's gone. That moment is gone, and people will mourn, but you got to move on and continue to protect and defend. And so again, I'm a little numb, but thank you for sharing that. I think that's for you to open up to about your own self, important. Talk about this portrait. What's happening here?
Yeah. So what happened with the rapid succession of the loss of my friends, and one friend getting killed after the other, made me realize the fragility of life. And I think so. After that first group of soldiers, the three soldiers who were killed, their units came to me and said, "What pictures do you have of them?" And I started going through my archives and pulled out all the pictures from past operations and gave them to them, in which turn they gave them to the families. And I was like, please don't tell them who took them. Just give them to the family. Don't tell them my name. At the time, I really struggled with being a woman and being there during the last moments of some of these soldiers' lives, and being a wife of a combat operator myself. It was really, really strange. I grappled with some really twisted thoughts. And I had a level of anonymity for like 10 years. Nobody knew where these pictures were coming from. But the thought occurred to me that I should start taking pictures of soldiers before operations, before we went out on patrols, or before we went on different missions, in the event that the worst happened. And so I started taking what I call now the last living picture. And so I have an archive of a number of portraits of soldiers. And this is just an example of the type of portraits I was taking before patrols.
I kind of having a moment now myself, because again, another parallel in our lives is taking pictures of sick kids. You inevitably, and it's just happened over the last 6 months twice, have taken the last portrait of somebody, and just recently happened. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's tough, and I know how tough that is, to even think that that's a possibility. So thank you again for sharing that. So we got some operations going on here. What's happening here?
Mike, I just want to say I'm sorry for your loss, and for anybody out there who has had some loss this year, I'm sorry for your loss too. And I hope that we can continue to support each other through these tough times, and that we remember the ups, and have some takeaways from the downs. But Mike, remember that each and every photograph that we take is going to last forever. And the one thing that we can do as photographers is make those moments last a lifetime, and to help remember the good. Okay. And I think that
it's a positive thing too, though, because those pictures mean more to the families. The pictures you take mean more to the families than you could ever imagine, because they're seeing them in the light of the beauty of who they were. Mm-hmm. You never expect your pictures to be part of a gallery at a funeral home. That's not what you're looking to do. Yeah. But you also realize it's helping people heal, and that's what gives you the energy to keep moving on.
I'm often asked, like, what's your favorite photograph? And I say, well, the ones you'll never see. Mm. Those are my favorites. They're not great, but they mean so much to me. But anyway.
So let's get back to this picture, but thank you.
Back on track.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously being on the front end of combat, right there in it, you get susceptible to exposures to bombs and bullets and all that stuff. And I was no different. I got hit by a roadside bomb in in February of 2004, got my bell rung, rehabbed, walked away with some vertigo and some neck trauma, went to Syracuse rehab, went back to combat camera, and got blown up again in 2007, and then was injured during a firefight when I got pulled off my feet going to help a wounded soldier. That injury is what ultimately led to the demise of my career, my combat photography career. I equate the loss of my military career almost like unrequited love. Like I put my heart and soul into that relationship, and then suddenly I found out that it was one-sided. It was a slap in the face. Moreover, I couldn't see myself being anything but a combat photographer, and I had an identity crisis like no other. And the doctors were telling me that I couldn't do photography anymore because of the nature of my injuries, lifting anything over 5 pounds, standing for prolonged periods of time, yada, yada, yada. And I really bought into that. And all of that emotional trauma that I sustained over that last deployment was starting to catch up with me. So the VA started throwing drugs at me. How's this pain med? How's this mental health medication? And just, I felt like I was drooling on the couch and really just mired down, circling the drain emotionally, and not knowing what my future was. I was 28 and feeling washed up. Not a good place to be. A lot of things were happening right at the same time, though. I was starting to get better. The doctors finally cleared me to be able to go back out and jog, and I could do a little bit more. I began taking portraits of veterans, which I will talk about in just a couple of pictures. And at the same time, an art curator reached out to me from Europe and said, we are doing a campaign for body armor, and we would love for you to be the photographer. And I was like, fake it till you make it. Sure, I can do commercial work. I'd never done commercial work a day in my life. I was a photojournalist, a combat photojournalist. I didn't know how to make an estimate or what contracts were like or copyright or anything. The only lighting class I had, and bless his heart, was so patient. Joe McNally taught me a class when I was in the service. And I was like, okay, I called Joe. I immediately called Joe. I called a few of my other contacts from Syracuse and put a bid together, an estimate together. And Lynn Del Mastro, who is Joe McNally's like right hand with all of his.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know where you're going with Joe. Joe and I are Pukum's best friends and lovers and all that. And it is Lynn who does all of that heavy lifting, and he'd admit that himself.
So between Joe's guidance and Lynn's breadth of knowledge, I
super production.
And I was a member of the ASMP, so I pulled together some assistants who knew lighting really well. Here's the thing. If you don't know something, don't be afraid to admit you don't know it. Then surround yourself with a team of people who do excel at the things you don't, and you're going to be better for it. Stop trying to hide your shortcomings, because
absolutely.
Growth is so important.
And we know Joe is a lighting master, certainly. I mean, an incredible photographer, but he's so approachable to teach. You know, what he teaches, he'll teach you how to fail and succeed in the same breath. I mean, it's just amazing. So,
yeah, and you have to fail to be better. I think that's so important. Okay, but what I did know was military. I knew the language, I knew the tactics, and I knew exactly the scenarios I wanted to recreate commercially. And then knowing the lighting, recreating lighting that I saw downrange. So everything I had, I was in control of, including the technical stuff with a camera. So this is an example of some of the work that I was doing during that time, doing house clearing. And again, this is a body armor campaign, and they wanted it to be more like advertorial, something that would actually happen in real life. This is the same guy, a double exposure or a timed exposure. So 1, 2, and then compressed with a camera and using SBs. So I had so much fun. I did a campaign in Florida, then we went to Pennsylvania. This one was done in Texas. So much fun.
And that's great. I mean, this is where you build your business. I mean, and like you said, you may not have known anything about production. You go to Lynn. Billing, you go to Lynn. You know, and figuring that all out, because once you do that, you know, it becomes repetitious in the business that you do. But that's great. I mean, and again, commercial work, always some of the best work out there. So what do we have going on here?
This is a portrait from the Veterans Portrait Project series that we were talking about a little bit. In 2008, I was in that transitional period. I was beginning to get better rehabbing, but not fast enough, in my opinion. I am so impatient. Just so you know, I got kicked in the head by a horse 2 days ago. I have
yeah. So did you post that somewhere? Because other people came up. Did you hear? You know, Melissa Bartolo, one of our good friends, just came down to the studio before. She's going to interview with you. She got kicked in the head by a horse. How is she interviewing with you? Tenacity.
I also got blown up by a bomb. Everything's about perspective. No, but I am very much like always moving forward. And I think that was the struggle that I had during that period. Is I had an identity crisis. I wasn't healing fast enough, and I was really trying to struggle. And I wasn't fitting in. I no longer belonged to the military family. I had people tell me that I wasn't a real photojournalist because I was a military photojournalist. And so I didn't quite fit into, say, a Reuters position or an AP position. And the commercial stuff was great. It was a lot of fun, but I really stuck fast to being a photojournalist. Why I did is probably a lot of reasons. I think I was just trapped in this place in my mind. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't fit in the veteran community, because when you say the word veteran, you automatically think an older male, somebody more like a Vietnam era veteran or World War II. I'm not the face. I'm 40 now, but I was 28 then, even younger. And the guys would gawk at me, they would whistle at me, and I was just really, really frustrated. I was waiting for a VA appointment when an elderly gentleman came and sat next to me, and he was just staring and staring and staring. I got so frustrated. I really wanted to tell him off, but the journalist in me wanted to ask his story. So I turned and his face lit up, and he began to tell me about his story from World War II. His name's Mickey Dorsey, survived D-Day, liberated a concentration camp, just a national treasure. And the thing was, he was a volunteer at the VA, and he saw me looking sullen and knew I needed somebody to talk to. So here I was thinking that he was prejudiced against me, and I was the prejudiced one. That was another aha moment for me. And I began to think about that last living picture that I had developed in Iraq, and thinking about, this gentleman's not going to be around forever. And people don't know his story. I could do that. I still have something to give. So I began to bring my camera to my doctor's appointments. I set up a studio and started taking portraits of veterans while they were waiting for their appointments. And then suddenly I wasn't thinking about the pain, and I wasn't thinking about woe is me or what am I going to do next. I began to put one foot in front of the other. And then I set a crazy goal that I would photograph veterans in every state, thinking that was going to take a lifetime. And I just hit all 50 states on Veterans Day last year. So 2019 took 11 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say that it took an army of people and support. And so for every one of you out there who donated $1, $5, your house, a car to the project to make it successful, thank you, thank you, thank you.
What a great start. And we talked about personal projects on panel discussions before, but again, that moment, that aha moment you speak about, that these things come together, you know, they're so important. They're so critical to shaping the next steps within our lives. And I kept this picture in. I know this is a portrait bio picture you sent in, but I kind of want to bring everybody back to that reminder of, you're in that hospital for yourself before this project starts. There's Charlie. We've had Charlie on stage at the Nikon Theater at trade shows before, but you know, I wanted to leave this picture in because you're doing all of this while you're dealing with your own health, be it physical or mental. And I love that notion of realizing that here's a veteran, and the veteran's not going to be around forever, right? We all will be somewhere else at some point. But just to strike that idea, I love to hear those stories when ideas have hit. But this is not so easy for you. And we talked about travel and how difficult it is, and how we're all happy a little bit that we're not on planes right now, but it's even worse, you know, traveling in the conditions that you travel in. So I left this portrait in, a beautiful portrait of you, had the Veterans Portrait Project and Charlie, and we got to see Charlie live. So that's great. Really amazing picture here. Very, very telling, certainly just as a portrait against a white backdrop. But what's happening here? Why'd you put this in the collection? Because I know you have so many.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Desala Mikosi, who has been my longtime wingman on the road with the Veterans Portrait Project, for taking that portrait of Charlie and me. And speaking of Desala, she once told me that she has been, I don't want to say assistant, more so than colleague, because she is a wonderful photographer in her own right, and then goes on the road with me to help. But she told me, like, she had no idea I even had a traumatic brain injury, or that she knew I had neck pain, but I always try and minimize how much people know about my disability. I did that for years. And so somebody asked her like, so how do you cope with somebody who has traumatic brain injury and has seizures? And she was like, I didn't even know she had a brain trauma. So this is me. Because in the military, you just rub some dirt on it, you keep going, and you don't talk about pain. And as a woman, I never wanted to be a statistic. I always wanted to just forge ahead. And I think I got that from my mother, but also my sister, who was the first female A-10 crew chief in Air Force history. And when she showed up to school, they said, "We're going to fail you. We don't want you here. There's no place for women." I wasn't going to be that gal. And I think to the detriment of my own health and well-being, I pushed that ideology. So Charlie's sitting here moaning at me now. You guys can't see him because he's out of frame, but he's so cute. Hi, buddy. I'm sorry, I will get to a point. Brain trauma. Now, when I was doing the project, this is before I had really accepted my limitations. I still couldn't lift the things I still couldn't lift excessive amounts. And that's where, like, Desala and Trish Barini and Ashley Brokop and all the other volunteers helping me on the road were helping me lift all these cases. And then standing for prolonged periods of time, because I was doing portrait sessions. Sometimes I would photograph maybe 20 portraits in about 4 hours, up to 100 portraits in just 5 or 6 hours. So it was grueling. And when I had my first grand mal seizure, it was then I realized I needed to make a change in my life. And that's when I applied for a service dog through America's Vet Dogs. And that's when I started to become more honest with myself about what I needed to be honest about to other people. I never wanted to ask for help. It was hard enough for me to bring an assistant on. And I could justify it in my mind that they were my photographic assistants, not my physical and emotional support. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so I finally got to this point where I had a pendulum swing. I'm an open book now. You guys, I have a traumatic brain injury. I struggle with anxiety and post-traumatic stress and all of these things, which impact me when I'm traveling, when I'm doing work. And but I think that the pros outweigh the cons, because I meet veterans like Bobby Henline, who's in this portrait with his service dog Daisy. Ironically enough, Bobby and I had worked on a number of projects together, one about coming back with Westmore through PBS. And we'd done all of these things together. And when I took this portrait, I found out that he and I were actually in the hospital in Iraq at the same time, and that we were under the same command in Diyala province during the surge. Small freaking world. So anyway, he is the Well Done comedian. If you want to check out some really great funny humor, he has a sick sense of humor like me. So we are two peas in a pod. And plus we're part of the same Veterans Speakers Bureau called Bravo 748. But anyway, Bobby was the sole survivor of an improvised explosive device with his vehicle, and had quite the rehabilitation. I thought, how can anybody walk away with such a great attitude? And this guy is a huge inspiration.
Look at that smile. I
I
mean,
know.
it's so inviting, and it says a lot about who he is. And thank you for sharing that. Beautiful. Who's this beautiful woman?
Ah, she is incredible. She sadly passed away last year.
Sorry to
But
hear that.
yeah, well, we can't live forever, sadly. And she had such an incredible life. Her portrait is on display at the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus, Ohio. And she stuck out to me. I met her in Phoenix, Arizona, and she stuck out to me because she wore this uniform that she actually fit in from her time in service, a Lady Marine, which is very rare for that time. It was during the Korean War. And for the women, like the men got issued uniforms, but the women were issued patterns so they could sew their own uniforms. Mm-hmm. We've come a long way. Anyway, she's incredible.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know. Beautiful series. What's going on here? I think this is one of our last images, right?
Yeah, I think we're getting to the end. This is an image I actually took in Syracuse, or at Syracuse, for one of my visits. His name is Philip George, and he's an Indigenous American. And I think what was really powerful, he showed up in his uniform with nothing else. So really unassuming if you were just to look at him, just another average Joe. And then he pulled out the flag of his nation and then put on his ceremonial headdress, and his whole demeanor changed. And I swear there was not a dry eye in proximity of the VPP studio at that time, because just to see the pride and the body language change. I love that image just because of the emotions that are attached to it. But he volunteered to go to the Army. He deployed and came back from combat, and is now he's a political science major at Syracuse so that he can be an advocate for Indigenous Americans and be a leader in his tribe, which is incredible.
Do you look back and are blown away? Think back that very first moment when you said, before you had the aha moment, when you're in the hospital and you wanted to hear that story, to how far you've come now. I mean, it's a long time, and there's so much behind you now. Do you ever get blown away by thinking, I can't believe how much of this I've done? How many portraits have you made about?
I lost count last year, but my last count was 8,200-ish. So it's got to be about right, maybe 8,500, I think.
It's over 8,500 stories about somebody and their story that they told. Thank you so much for that. Let me bring you back up full screen. I'm just so happy to be here with you. And I feel like even through the years we've known each other, I've learned even that much more. So I hope everybody out there has been inspired by the stories to these images, and certainly inspiration to follow that passion like you did, continue to grow as you did, the stepping stones within your world. I do want to ask before you go, so where along the way do you meet Andy?
Oh, I kind of glazed over him, didn't I?
I'm just curious where you guys met.
Okay. So to be really honest, Andy and I did not hit it off right away. Actually, when I reported to the unit in January 2002, he was coming back to Combat Camera for his second tour. And I had just come back from a training exercise in Korea, and I really totally messed up because I was doing a night operation and kept my ISO like super high. And then the next day I forgot to change it. Again, I was not good. So I'm like trying to hide this work because it's like chum in the water for sharks, and the sharks will come if they know that you screwed up. Andy being the chief great white in that pool of sharks. Anyway, so I'm like huddled over my computer, like trying to put my blinders on at my cubicle, and I'm looking through these pictures, and I'm looking at the metadata, and I'm sitting there like, oh my God, I completely messed up. And then suddenly I feel this presence like looming over me, and I look up, and it's Andy, Sergeant Dunaway at the time, and I'm like, and he's like, "What'd you do there? Why is that ISO like that?" And he was like, "Just."
That's so Andy.
I hated him for pointing it out, and then I just I loathed his very presence for a number of years after that. It wasn't until I came back from Syracuse and I went on deployment, and we started talking about the emotional traumas of being frontline photojournalists, high risk environment shooters. And he knew I was struggling from some of my combat operations. And I think what was different was the guys could talk amongst themselves and talk freely and get it off their chest. And I think I internalized it because, again, I did not want them to have any fodder for saying women don't belong.
Mm-hmm.
And he just found a really gentle way of saying that we are all in this human experience together and that you can talk to me. And that's when he had me. My heart melted.
Aww.
We've been friends ever since.
So cute. Well, please tell
really
him I said hello.
Yeah.
You know, and thank you again for giving us your time. Great backstories, and certainly emotional, heartfelt stories. And thank you for sharing your personal experiences, because I don't think many people know that and what you've had to go through to get to where you are sitting here right now. So I'm glad we've had this conversation. So thank you for your time. Those of you tuning into the Creators Hour, another epic interview. Check out nikonusa.com/Creators Hour to see other interviews we've done and the schedule of things to come. Stacy will be joining in at Nikon USA on our Instagram page for an Ask Me Anything. So if you got any questions for Stacy, she will be out there answering questions. So check that out. We all hope that you were inspired here and educated, and you go out there and take beautiful pictures and share them with us, share them with everybody. And everybody, just continue to work your way out of this pandemic together. And hopefully we'll see a lot of beautiful, beautiful pictures to come. But thank you guys for tuning in. For Nikon, I'm Mike Corrado. Everybody out there, be safe, and we will see you soon.